You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. It's just me, Spencer German, riding solo with you. Nick Wilson is out gallivanting around the fine city of Chicago, Illinois. So I hope he's enjoying himself. But in the meantime, I don't want to miss a beat. I want to keep this conversation going with you twice a week. And so here we are back with you, or here I am back with you as we inch closer and closer to the spring game. I know everyone's got that circled on their calendar, April 13th. We're in March, so we're only We're only a month away now. Sorry. It's been a long week, so all my days are blurring together. But we are only about a month away from the spring game, a month and a couple weeks. So that's obviously exciting stuff, and I'm excited to talk all things Ohio State, all things college football with you on this latest episode of Sons of the Shoe. I want to remind you guys, as we are still, I would say, a new podcast. We just started in the fall, to like, follow, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, the Odyssey app, 92tothefan.com, Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever it might be. As always, too, please comment on the 92 to the Fan YouTube page. We appreciate those interactions. We do try our best to respond and interact with you guys there. So you're more than welcome to join the conversation as well on that platform. But where I want to start today is kind of where we left off with the last episode in relation to Marvin Harrison Jr. I want to explain some things about some comments that we did actually have on the YouTube page. Shout out to those of you who did respond 2 episodes ago. And then we got some other things to hit on, including the idea of a world that exists without the NCAA as an organization in it. Can that actually happen? I'm going to lay it all out for you. That'll be coming up second segment. But to start us off, like I said, Marvin Harrison Jr., we had talked on Tuesday about this idea that he wasn't going to be doing any drills. I actually thought he wasn't showing up at all. He did show up, did the interviews with teams. And I do think, having been out in Indianapolis myself, the most important thing that comes out of the combine for any team is those interviews. And I understand, like, every year you get these goofy questions about, like, what's in your refrigerator and what does your mom do for a living? And it's like all these different weird things that they try to kind of just see, I guess, how you answer and how you react in real time to a question like that. Goofy stuff can happen at these things. But that is primarily what I think a lot of the teams are present for. It's what a lot of the teams are trying to kind of prioritize in terms of meeting these players, seeing how they could potentially fit with your team, because you're supposed to go out there and get a sense of where guys could fit and be within your organization. So he was there for that. He didn't speak to the media either. And he's not doing the drills. Now, what's interesting about this, because first of all, for Marvin Harrison Jr.'s sake, he has more to lose from being out there than he does to gain. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a freak of nature wide receiver athlete. I have stood by the stance, and I'll say this here on this podcast. This will be like the 4th or 5th platform I think I've said this on. Marvin Harrison Jr., if I haven't said it already, I might have. We've done so many episodes, I lose track of all my takes. But Marvin Harrison Jr., when he gets drafted in April, will instantly be a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. That is not hyperbole. That is not over-exaggeration. Like, I truly believe that when he gets drafted, he is going to be that star-level player, elite talent at the wide receiver position, and he's going to be comparable to some of his contemporaries that are already in the league at this point, including some of those who are Ohio State guys that he's going to certainly be stacked up against and compared to, and all these different things. So that is how talented I think he is. And so him going to Indy for the important thing of meeting with teams, but skipping all the events, not meeting with the media, that stuff doesn't bother me. Like, I am not in the least concerned about him not showing up to those types of things, because frankly, guys, if he tears an ACL, if he gets hurt, again, he has more to lose than he has to gain. And not every player can do that, which is why I think there's interesting conversations had about the combine year after year and whether or not it's kind of this archaic thing that we don't really need anymore, because the tape is the most important. And that should be the standard. I'm assuming NFL scouting departments know that better than even I do. I don't work in a scouting department for a living, so it's not my job to assess these guys at a level where I'm deciding, this guy's going to be a hit for us. He's going to work on our team. I do some of that, but it's not my profession. So no, like me sitting here saying that shouldn't be groundbreaking because that should be already established in the NFL, that the tape is what matters most. And that if you're banking anything other than, I guess, some of the athleticism and traits that you're looking at while you're at the combine and you're letting that kind of tell the story of a guy, unless they really bomb an interview and you just think they're not going to be, they're a bag dude for your team. I can't really take much away from the combine, but I don't think that means the combine goes away, because there are players that the combine helps. Braden Fisk, for example, out of Florida State. He had the best interior defensive lineman day you could have in drills on Thursday. I was sitting there watching him. He had the best 40 time of those guys. He had the best broad jump. He had the best high jump. So, like, he put up some numbers that are going to help his draft stock. He might have not been the consensus number one defensive lineman off the board. He still might not be, but he's probably now going to be talked about in a different category because he put up some big numbers. But he's a player who he wasn't going into the draft sort of considered this just high level elite talent that you can't miss on. You know what I mean? So I don't think the combine's ever going away, but I think that players like Marvin Harrison Jr. and even Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams talked on Friday just about why he didn't do medicals. And he didn't, and I think it makes sense for a guy who's probably going to be off the board within 10 minutes of the draft opening to not put yourself out there to get just dissected every inch of you by all 32 teams so that they can find something wrong with you and then spin that into some narrative or story. Like, just show up, do what you got to do, and get out of there. That's the reason why he's not throwing. It's the reason why other quarterbacks aren't going to be throwing in the combine, which is going on Saturday as of recording this. So I'm less interested in some of the stuff that goes on at the combine, and I can understand why it seems like maybe it's not needed, but it's only there is a very small group of players that can avoid skipping drills, that can avoid not doing the interviews, that can avoid not doing that stuff. Marvin Harrison Jr., Caleb Williams, there's others who are lumped into that it doesn't really matter for, and that those guys have already established themselves as the talents that they're going to be. So they're just, I don't think that they have to show up. Now that could be the trend that continues, but I don't think the combine just arbitrarily disappears altogether. And I thought about this because every year you hear there's more momentum on guys just kind of sticking with the pro days and, trying to just kind of in their own comfortable environment with the team that they played for in college, doing the same exact stuff that they're supposed to do with the combine. I'm not saying that, and maybe we get to a point where that just becomes what it is. It's just going to these pro days and you interview all the players that you want to interview there, whatever. But the problem is a lot of these pro days overlap, so you don't have time to get to every single one. This is a chance to get all these guys in one place and be able to kind of organize and talk to them, which is why, again, I don't think it ever truly goes away. There's a select few number of players who can do it. Marvin Harrison Jr. and other guys are doing where they don't have to show up, but they don't have to be there, and it's not going to impact their draft stock all that much. But for the rest of this group of players that are out there in Indy, it matters. And so you're not going to see that from everybody. And there's certainly some value in it. But again, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all as these guys go to the NFL. But there's been some impressive performances to this point. Those will continue throughout the weekend. But as far as I think there was somebody who tried to spin the Marvin Harrison Jr. thing as I expected, because there's always one person. And listen, I make a living being a talking head, talking sports, whether it's on this podcast, on the radio, whatever. And I certainly come out with some fiery takes at times. But you will find somebody on an island if their take is Marvin Harrison Jr. not showing up to the NFL Combine is a reason not to draft him. There are legitimate reasons not to draft players that maybe you feel like aren't going to put in the work and that maybe you learn about at the Combine that it's a scene from the movie Draft Day, right? Why didn't anybody show up to your party, Bo Callahan? Well, he wasn't really liked by his teammates, something along those lines. Like maybe that's the type of stuff you find out. Maybe you realize that guy's not a fit, but not showing up to the combine because you have quite literally already proven to everybody that you should be the consensus number one wide receiver off the board is a nothing burger to me. So don't be that guy. I think there already was a guy, and I hope that person's on an island and nobody agrees with him because there's no chance in hell that Marvin Harrison Jr.'s draft stock should be impacted in any way whatsoever by him not showing up. And I do think what's interesting about what Marvin Harrison is doing is this concept of prepping for the season that he'll play his rookie year rather than just working out for teams. That is a concept that I find fascinating because there's been studies done on just the grueling grind that players coming out of college go through to get to the NFL in their rookie season. You're talking about your season ends, you spend months training, you go to the combine and work out. You're training some more, you do your pro day. You're training some more as you meet with teams and going through these rigorous workouts. Then you get drafted. Then you got the rookie program. Then you got OTAs. Then you got mini camp. Then you got training camp. Then your season starts, and it's a longer season than you're used to playing in college, and you're off and running, and it's the reason why they sometimes see rookies don't put up the big numbers or they don't necessarily come in and perform at a high level, or it takes them a couple years to get there because these players go through this grind, this gauntlet of a process to get to the NFL. And so I think it's actually super smart by Marvin Harrison Jr. And I hope that other star players are able to follow suit like that moving forward. Again, not everybody has the luxury of doing that, but I hope that Marvin Harrison Jr. does set a trend that some of these star-studded players, they don't need to necessarily go through the grind that the NFL puts them through at every step of the way. If they've already established themselves where they feel comfortable and where they know they're going to be going in a certain range or at a certain point in the draft, fine. Train for the season because that is way more important to any of these teams than what you're going to run in the 40-yard dash at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. So that is the trend I hope does kind of continue to happen, is that other star – and this isn't – I understand. There's a lot of people out there who are very, well, if you can't play in a bowl game or you can't do these workouts, like it just tells me that you're lazy and blah, 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 blah. I understand that's going to be a take for some people. That's not my stance on it. If a player has the luxury of not having to go through this rigorous process, they shouldn't. And they should be preparing for the next season. It's the same thing I say about the players who skip bowl games. I understand what they're doing. They got too much on the line. They got too much at stake. They have a chance to go to the pros and make life-changing money. And if people are going to throw back in your face that they can make life-changing money in NIL and all this different stuff. But the difference is, like, that money can be gone in a second if you get hurt. I don't know how all these NIL things work, but a lot of times we've seen instances of players being promised things that they're not actually promised. So it's a different situation. It's a chance to go pro. I don't fault anybody who skips different things, or whether it's a bowl game, whether it's the combine or whatever. And this should absolutely not be any sort of indictment, if you will, on Marvin Harrison Jr., on Caleb Williams, on Drake May, on any of these guys who are deciding not to participate in certain portions of the scouting combine. Now, before we go to break, I want to rewind actually back to 2 shows ago where we talked about the announcement of the new playoff, 12-team playoff, and how basically Notre Dame is going to only ever be able to be the 5 seed at the highest. And the reason for that is they agreed to this new format where it's 12 teams, and it's your conference winners, your top 4 conference winners get the buys, so they can never get a bye, was the point of the conversation. And we had some people comment, and I want to clarify. The titling of the clip I put out there, the individual clip, Sorry Not Sorry Notre Dame, that was just to kind of catch your attention. And I got some people commenting, so I'm happy with my work. Chef's kiss to me. I did a beautiful job trying to draw people in with a controversial title to that episode. But I do want to clarify, like, I understood that was what ND agreed to, and that Jack Swarbrick, basically, he knew going in that was what the situation was going to be for Notre Dame, that they agreed to that because they're not ever going to play a 13th game because they can't play in a conference championship game. So I want to make it clear, like, we already understood that this was an agreed to thing. It wasn't us being stupid and just being like, wow, I can't believe it. But the point of the conversation was just that I understand that there's a lot of fans out there who know that this was an agreed to thing. Certainly informed fans will. And there's also going to be plenty of people who are okay with it and say like, okay, it's what we agreed to. Fine. We don't play a 13th game because we're not in a conference. Fine. But the point of the conversation was there's going to be a year where maybe that first time it happens where Notre Dame fans are left holding the bag and because they feel like their team got slighted and got left out of the top 4, even though they're undefeated and maybe we're 3 and then they drop down and they're 5, even if they just for being idle for a week. And there's going to be some group of fans out there that didn't know it was a thing. That's all I'm trying to say. There's going to be people who didn't know it was a thing, and they're going to be outraged when it happens. There always is. Everybody understands the process of the 14 playoff, and then every year we are mad about something. Like, they get to pick the teams whether we like it or not. So if you're upset about it, you're upset about it. That's what you agreed to. It's the same thing. They agreed to it, yes, but there will be fans who don't understand that and who get outraged the first time Notre Dame gets left out of that top 4 and they don't have a bye week. So I just wanted to clarify that. I also think the main point of the conversation was just what this means for Notre Dame in terms of will it entice them a little bit more to potentially join a conference at some point, which I think, given how the landscape's changing, I don't think it's going to last forever that Notre Dame can't be in a conference. At some point, the money involved in these TV deals that the two, I guess, big conferences that are forming are going to get is going to be too much for them to pass up, where they'll just join a conference and they'll get a piece of the pie. That's my true feelings on it. All right. With that said, we need to take a break. When we get back, can you envision a world where the NCAA doesn't exist? It might not be as great as you think it is. We'll do that next here on Sons of the Shoe. But quickly here, we pause for a word from our sponsors. Back with you on Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German with you, riding solo for this second episode of the week, if you will. And there's some interesting things happening in the NCAA right now from a legal standpoint. I want to get to that, but since we ended revisiting, if you will, the 12-team playoff format, I do want to talk about this idea as the NCAA has been meeting this week about the possibility of expanding to 14 teams. Because, listen, this whole thing, they didn't listen to us as fans of college football when they expanded the playoff. We all said 6. I said 8 because I thought 8 was perfect. And that current at the structure of the NCAA of college football at that time, you had 5 Power 5 conferences. Okay, you win your conference, you get an auto bid, you're in. And then you hand out 3 at-large bids. So that gives you room for the Cincinnatis of the world, or the next top ranked like non-Power 5 conference winner to get in or something like that. And then you settle those debates about, well, should 2 SEC teams get in? Should 2 Big Ten teams get in? And you're able to sort of sort through those things and put a couple different teams in, and you're off and you're running. It's 8 teams. Because listen, as much as I love more college football, I also can wrap my head around the idea that there's only so many teams in any given season that truly have a chance to win a national championship. Like truly have a chance. Now, maybe the landscape changed, all the NIL stuff changes that a little bit more, expands things out. There's more parity. That's the hope, I think. So maybe we get to a point where that's true. But in this, but I stand by what I said. Like, there's generally only a few teams that you can go into the season and feel like, okay, those teams will have a chance. This past year, season started, we all said, if Ohio State gets good quarterback play, they could be one. We said Michigan was loaded. They were coming back for another a third year of this kind of very deep team that Jim Harbaugh had built. That's another one. We said Georgia. We said Bama, because Bama's Bama, and they're always right there in the conversation. And they made the playoffs, so they did have a chance. And there was a few other stragglers. People really liked FSU. People thought maybe LSU could come along, but their defense was putrid. But there's like a handful of teams. So I always thought 8 was enough. That was what we really asked for in the beginning, was 6 or 8. Now, not only did they blaze past 8 to get to 12, which fine. Okay, more college football. 12 is, I can still understand 12. Might be getting a little bit too much, but I can understand 12. It expands the field. It allows you to sort some of these things out and truly answer the questions about who are the best teams in the country. I can wrap my head around it. I'm not going to dispute it. I'm okay with it. I've embraced it. I've accepted it. And I like 12. And I honestly thought 12 was going to be enough. I was like, let's stick with 12 for a while. And by a while, I mean maybe my entire lifetime. I love the idea of 12 teams making the playoff, and that's how we decide a national champion in college football. But now, before we even get to see the 12-team playoff in execution, we're already talking about 14. I mean, what the hell is going on? How can we already be talking about 14 teams when we haven't even seen the 12-team playoff work? We haven't even seen what it looks like yet. That's mind-boggling to me. That I can't wrap my head around. I am not for a 14-team playoff before we even see the 12-team playoff. And I understand at this point, like, fans asked for 8. We didn't get it. I think this is the thing. They just don't want to listen. The College Football Playoff Committee just doesn't want to listen to the fans at all. They just want to do it their own way so that they look like the geniuses. Because we all said 4 was not going to be enough, and then that proved to be true. And now we're saying 12 is probably the end, the higher end that you could go to. And they're talking about 14. I mean, what are we going to do? We're just going to keep expanding this thing? Is it going to become the NCAA tournament for basketball where we have 64 teams all make it out of the 133 that exist in college football, and they're all going to duke it out for a national championship? UMass versus Georgia to start things off. Let's get it. Let's see how that works out. Like, come on. I'm not saying eventually it wouldn't go to 14 because I understand at the end of the day, and this is why none of us could understand in the first place why they wouldn't go to 12 initially. And what's funny, I don't want to take credit for this because there's no way they were listening to Spencer German in Cleveland, Ohio to figure out how this thing was going to set up. But I said years ago to make it 8 and use the top end name bowls as your sort of your quarterfinals, your semifinals, whatever, as you lead your way to the national championship game. And that's exactly what they're doing with the 12-team playoff. It's you win in the first round, and then that next round is all the big games, the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, all those different things will sort of appear in that next round and finish out through the rest of the playoffs till you get to the national championship game. So, okay, basically, you're welcome, NCAA, because I know that was my idea, and now you're using it just in an expanded playoff to get to 12. And the other thing that we just couldn't wrap our heads around, any of us who were in favor of playoff expansion, was the fact that this is all just a money grab for the NCAA. Like, you're just printing money if you have more football games that people are going to tune in for, especially more meaningful football games that people are going to tune in for. They finally realized that. And now it's like they got a little too drunk off of the green that they're going to be printing when they start this 12-team playoff that they're already thinking so far ahead as to say, well, let's actually make it 14 while we're having the conversation. I don't want to see it to get to 14. I want to at least see the 12-team playoff function for at least a span of years here, like maybe a decade. At least this 14 playoff thing, it went basically a decade, 2014 to 2023. So can we at least see what it looks like first and see if you need to add more? Because I agree with the people who argue like the games get worse and worse the more lopsided the matchup. I've always said college football is better than the NFL when you get 2 evenly matched teams against each other. I just have a lot of fun with those games. But when you get 2 unevenly matched teams against each other, it can get ugly really, really quickly. And I don't think that we need to expand so far that now you're talking about games that just do not matter whatsoever and nobody wants to pay attention to. Like, I don't know what the tipping point is. And maybe there is no tipping point because it's football and we freaking love football in this country. We will eat up any football on our TV, so much so that we're watching Maction on Tuesday nights now. They're putting football on Tuesday nights in the middle of the week because they know that we will watch it. So maybe I'm wrong about this, and they'll just keep expanding it out and making money, and it won't matter. But I do think we should at least settle for 12, see how that goes first, before we just jump ship and say, let's add 14. Not on board with it. Not on board with it. Now, another big talking point from college football this week is just this all the inner workings of what's going on with the NCAA and this lawsuit that has been filed against them in Tennessee and Virginia, where the attorney generals of those states basically argued or filed an injunction against the NCAA, saying that it basically is illegally restricting opportunities for student athletes by preventing them from negotiating the terms of NIL deals prior to deciding where they want to go to school. It was filed on January 31st, one day after Tennessee Chancellor Donde Plowman revealed in a letter to the NCAA that the school's athletic department was being investigated for potential recruiting rules violations. So essentially, this sets the stage now. As I'm sure you've heard talked about already other places, but we haven't necessarily had a chance to dive into it on this show. The NCAA cannot rule on any sort of NIL restrictions or rules violations. Like, they can't really investigate those things at this time. They are prohibited from doing that at this very moment. I think there was a few things that Pete Thamel put out that they did uphold in relation to NIL. I'm going to try to find that right now so I can sort of read those things off to you. But for the most part, like, they basically cannot. Here's what they said. The judge's order also upheld 3 specific NCAA policies that remain in effect and will be enforced by NCAA staff. The prohibition on pay-for-play/payment for specific athletes' performances, so they can still rule on those things. The prohibition of a direct institutional payment for NIL, so they can't. So teams, universities still can't do that. And quid pro quo requirements. The proposals related to student-athlete protections adopted in January on track for August 1st for an August 1st effective date. Also, the injunction and the NCAA's response are effective for all Division I. So those are the 3 things that they can still basically go rule on and make decisions on and punish teams for. But they cannot prohibit a team from being like, hey, we got this guy who's a booster. He wants to work out an NIL deal with you. Go get it. Like, they can't be prohibited from directing players to do that because, as the injunction said, the NCAA, if they are doing that, they're preventing student athletes from having the opportunity to earn money and negotiate terms of NIL deals prior to deciding where they want to go to school. And that's the key thing. They're not but the general thing here from this entire legal process that's going on right now is that many have said this is basically a death knell to the NCAA. It's going to disappear. They have no power. They've been stripped of all gravitas. They can't do what they used to do. And so fold up shop, throw in the towel on the NCAA. I understand why many of us have come to blows basically with this organization over the years and why we're sick of a lot of the way that they do things. They're very reactive, not proactive. They do stupid stuff like take away wins and all this different stuff. And they really haven't had much, they really haven't had much they really haven't had much power in a series of years anyway. And we've seen it slowly sort of trickle away. But I want to make an important distinction here. The NCAA having power over college football is different than the NCAA as an organization existing. Like, if we want to say that this means they'll have no more say in college football and college football should branch out and do their own thing, 100%, I agree. I think that should almost be the route that this goes. And that's been bantied about for years as well, that's what should happen. So I'm not saying that that's not where this thing should lead or where this thing should go. But in terms of the NCAA not existing anymore, and if that organization disappears, I think that we're flirting with something bad that we don't even necessarily all fully understand. I think we get stuck in this mindset where the only thing that matters in college sports is football, and even to an extent college basketball. But we forget that there are a number of other athletic programs that are not money-making sports at schools. Now, some schools, like I would imagine Iowa right now is making good money because they have Caitlin Clark and they're just raking in the dough. So, like, there's other schools that have, like, programs that still become moneymakers for them because they get so good and everybody's going out to see that team potentially. There's certain schools that baseball might be a money-making sport for. Like, I get that. But in general, most of the other sports are not money-making sports at any given university. So who governs them if the NCAA just ceases to exist because college football basically goes after them in court and renders them useless in terms of what they do with college football? And that's my problem. This isn't trying to be some like, woe is me. Why can't we just have things the way that it used to be and student athletes should just be student athletes? I'm not saying that at all. I actually think there was a line in the piece I was reading about this whole injunction where Charlie Baker basically said that the restriction on recruiting was written basically because the association wants athletes to choose their future schools based on the best educational opportunities rather than where they could make the most money. No wonder the injunction was filed. Like that is still so much like the Mark Emmert mindset of we want these players to be students first. I am so beyond the thought process that has to be true. I get that we want that. We long for that era where they just played for the love of the game and they went to your school and represented you and they were students sitting in your class with you. But those days are gone. Those days were gone as soon as the NCAA started signing these massive TV deals and not letting the players see a dime of the money. We're too far gone from that. It just ain't happening anymore. So we got to come to grip with the reality we're facing. And so, yeah, I'm fine with players negotiating NIL deals before they sign somewhere and that being a reason why they maybe choose a school. I don't care. It's no skin off my nose. It's not my money. So if they want to do that and that's what it's going to take to lure a player to a certain school, fine. And it's the same thing Nick and I have been saying over and over again. These coaches who love to just tout that the NCAA is crooked and it's not what they signed up for, whatever, like with this NIL stuff, I have no sympathy for you. You either figure it out or the game's going to pass you by and you'll have to go coach somewhere else. That's all I got for you. But so that's not me doing this. But I do think on some level, the NCAA has to exist because you have so many other sports to think about. It's not just college football. And having worked for multiple athletic departments in college sports at different levels, by the way, D3 on up to D1, I know that those programs just can't, like they need some sort of body that oversees them. Even if we disagree with some of the things that they do, maybe that can change over time and they can get better still. But if that ceases to exist, and it's twofold, like if football branches off and they have their own pot of money, I don't know what happens to a lot of these other programs. And that is an alarming thing because as much as our appetite for football and basketball may be the highest, and it may be the things that we want to consume the most, you got to think about the opportunities for players who want to go to a school and swim, players who want to go to a school and play golf or play baseball or softball or lacrosse. Like there's so many other sports out there that provide scholarship opportunities to other athletes or to other students, and those matter too. So I think the NCAA truly needs to still be an organization that exists and doesn't just disappear entirely, even though some people might disagree with that, and I understand why. I just think that the solution to me seems to be, which has been said before, that maybe football needs its own governing body. And if that's the college football playoff committee or some new committee they formed that branches off of the college football playoff committee, fine. So be it. Whatever it is and whatever it looks like, fine. But the next big scary thing that could happen is if they take the money off of themselves, that again hurts the programs. So there has to be some give and take here. Like I understand the football players and the teams, like they want all this money and they want to do all these different things. But on some level, like they can't kill off the NCAA and hope that they still have an athletic department that still exists. Because I'm telling you, they also can't hoard all the money and expect those other athletic programs to exist. And that's the problem with all of this. Like that's the things that have to be worked out as time kind of goes on here, and as this shift in college football in particular takes more and more of a stranglehold over the college athletics that we once knew. So I'm just trying to make a stance on those other sports and those other athletes. And that's not to say deprive the football players of their money. That's not to say that it doesn't need to change for that sport specifically. I just think, and it's not to say that NIL shouldn't be a thing. I think NIL is great, but I don't know that everybody understands the full scope of what losing the NCAA as an organization or what football hoarding all the money would mean for other schools. Because I'm telling you, there'd be plenty of schools that have to cut programs, cut scholarship opportunities, cut opportunities for players in other sports to maybe go, if it's an Olympic sport, like go to the Olympics, like try their hand at something that could still turn into a career for them. And I don't know that we necessarily want to see that happen either. Do you agree that the NCAA needs to still exist beyond whatever changes are coming to college football in order to keep the rest of the athletic programs at all these institutions up and running and functioning at a high level, even though they're maybe not money-making sports. You can comment on the 92 to the Fan YouTube page. You can hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_. Let's take another break as we get a word from our sponsors here. When we get back, though, finally, we got to address some of the comments that Nick Saban made a couple weeks ago. Also, we'll give you the Michigan Panic Meter. I got another Michigan topic. I don't know if we'll have time for it, so I might save it for when Nick's back with me next week. We'll see. But I appreciate you guys jumping on in with us. Let's take a break and hear a quick word from our sponsors. We are back on Sons of the Shoe, or I am back on Sons of the Shoe. It's so much more smooth to say we because it's usually a we. It's usually Nick and I, but Nick not here for this latest episode. But we appreciate your listenership as always. We talked about some good things throughout this first 35 or so minutes together, and we got one last segment for you here. I know we've just kind of been blanketly saying Michigan Panic Meter hasn't changed, Michigan Panic Meter hasn't changed, but if we have any new listeners, I think it's important we flash it up on the screen. We explain the Michigan Panic Meter to you. So basically, the Michigan Panic Meter is a meter that Nick and I use to assess our panic level, other Ohio State fans' panic levels in relation to Michigan and where they're at. Now, when they were winning a national championship, we were both pretty deep in the Scarlet side. The Scarlet is kind of your higher level panic. And then when Ohio State went on this rampage they did of signing all these guys and making all these changes, we have shifted more into the gray side of the scale, which is more timid, a little more calm, not so, or timid is the right word, a little bit more subdued, not as worried about the situation at Michigan. And so for several weeks now, we have largely been in the dark gray side of the scale. I can tell you as I flash this up on the screen here for our YouTube viewers or followers, staying in the gray. It is staying in the dark gray, no shift, nothing that alarms me about Michigan at this time, despite Sharon Moore sort of having some trash talk of his own to throw back at Ohio State, saying that they'll settle it in November in terms of the matchup between those two teams. But we're a couple weeks removed from that. I said this to Nick a couple weeks ago, I am kind of mad at myself for being so deep in the gray that I have no room to wiggle after the spring game. Like if the spring game goes off without a hitch, now I have nowhere to go. I just keep it there. There's got to be something that makes me change it a little bit this offseason. So we'll see if anything comes to be. But for now, not panicked, feeling good. First week of first week of March, and I'm sitting pretty right now in terms of my panic over Michigan, which is basically nil at the moment, despite coming off a national championship season. All right, the last thing before we get out of here, and I know we've kind of teased this several times and never gotten to it, so I'm just going to talk. I'm going to cut to the chase and talk to you about it here now. A couple different things that Nick Saban said that were interesting a couple weeks back. The first thing, which I found interesting, well, let's start with the maybe larger scale one, and then we'll get to the less important one at the end. But the larger scale one was just his commentary on whether he basically said if his voice can bring about meaningful change to college football, he wants to help in any way he can. He said he loves the players and he loves college football. And what we have now is not college football, not college football as we knew it. You hear somebody use the word student athlete, that doesn't exist. And he kind of goes on to give that same spiel that you've heard from other coaches about like education matters and, the impact of college football is more than just on the field and some of these different lines these cliche lines that these coaches are delivering. Now, I want to make this clear. Nick and I have both agreed that all of this frenzy over college football changing and coaches saying this isn't what I signed up for and all these different things, all of that has to do with not having control anymore. And yes, I think a lot of these coaches are leaving and fleeing because they're like, well, I don't have control anymore. I don't like it. This isn't what I want. Okay, that's fine. That's their prerogative to leave if they want to leave. But I think when Nick Saban says these things, and maybe this is going to come back and bite me in the ass and Nick's going to rip me for it. But when Nick Saban says these things, I tend to kind of believe them more. Why? I think the simple answer as to why is just because Nick Saban I think the proof is just in the pudding, if I'm being honest. Like, he's the guy who after a bad game by two players, he's sitting there saying this guy and this guy, they did a tremendous job and sort of supporting them. He's the guy who got into the I forget who it was who was, I don't know if it was Holly, I don't think it was Holly Rowe, but whoever it was who was asking the questions after that game was Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, and whether or not who he's going to start, and he said, I'm not going to tell you, so quit asking. Like, he's the guy who defends his players wholeheartedly. I also think, coming back to the point of the proof is in the pudding, it's not just about the championships and that clearly guys were bought into, well, he does things the right way. I think it's also, frankly, just about the fact that Saban, like, these players that go through his system, they go to the NFL, and you can talk to them about their days at Alabama. I just did this with Amari Cooper several weeks ago when the retirement announcement was made. I talked to him about, like, the impact that Nick Saban had on his life. So I think that you hear these players talk about how he became like a father, like a second father figure, and he meant so much to me, and he had my best interest in mind. Like, it's more than just football. It's always been more than just football for him. And so I do believe that I think two things can be true with Nick Saban. I think he can have kind of run scared from college football because it's not what he's used to. Like he said in the quote that I read you, I don't think he liked it very much like some of these other guys. He doesn't like the changing tides. He doesn't like NIL being a thing. It's all just too much, and he's losing a lot of the control that he used to have. So yeah, he's probably sick of it and wants to move on. Fine. I also think that it can be true that Nick Saban, maybe even more so than other coaches, I trust that he actually does have the player's entire experience in mind when he does these things. Because another quote he had in this piece is he thinks the consequences of this current landscape of college football could come down the road when some of these guys get to 28, 29, and maybe they didn't prepare themselves for what life looks like without football. And that is a legitimate problem. I mean, the NFL stands for not for long, right? We always throw that out there as the cliche sort of joke about the NFL, but it's not a joke to a lot of these players because they get to the league, they spend maybe 3-4 years in it, and then they fizzle out because they're not these top tier players. We only remember the top tier players, but we forget about the guys who get lost in the shuffle. And if those guys don't have a career path to pursue or have that education that the opportunity to go to Bama or any of these schools affords them, then yeah, like, they can be left holding the bag. Like, that is a legitimate thing that is happening to these players. So no, I'm not saying play for the fun of the game, be student athletes again. Let's go backwards. I've made that clear numerous times throughout this episode, but I just do think that in that era, Nick Saban was one of the better people and more trustworthy people when it came to having the big picture for these players in mind and truly helping them in that. So when he says these things, I believe him. I believe he does want to be an advocate for the game and help figure out the right way to structure some of these things so that players aren't getting taken advantage of. Because I still stand by, I think the transfer portal is actually more dangerous in some ways than what NIL is. NIL is NIL. They deserve a chance to make money. But the transfer portal, guys can't finish their educations if they so want to because they're jumping school to school. They don't even have a chance to, or credits don't transfer over, or whatever it might be. You get lured into the transfer portal because bad actors are telling you, hey, we can get you money at this school, and then maybe it doesn't come to fruition, and you're stuck holding the bag looking for a place to play. There's a lot of reasons why the transfer portal can almost go too far and be taken and allow players to be taken advantage of, and I don't want to see that happen either. So there's got to be some balance to these things. I don't have the blueprint for that. Nick Saban doesn't even have the blueprint for that. But I think his point is if he can actually be a voice that helps this changing era and stabilize it a little bit, I think that's probably good. And I do, like I said, trust him more than maybe others. And when he says these things, that he wants the players to get paid, which he did make clear, but he also thinks that there's ways to clean it up a little bit. And I think that's probably a good way to go about it. I don't think the iteration we see right now is going to be the iteration forever. But I do think that the players deserve more power than they've obviously ever had at the table. The other thing he talked about, and this is more a blip on the radar thing, but still something that caught some people's attention, but he made a comment as he joins the College Gameday crew that he is never going to pick against Alabama. And I'm curious your guys' thoughts. So please tweet me at @Spencito_, comment on the 92 to the Fan YouTube page, because I am genuinely curious how you guys feel about Nick Saban not picking against Bama. understanding that as Ohio State fans, there were some rabid Ohio State fans that literally ran Kirk Herbstreit out of Ohio State because he wouldn't pick Ohio State enough, which in my opinion, as somebody who grew up in that sports journalism, umbrella, when I went to school and I studied it and all these different things, I think it's better that Kirk kind of goes in with this objective mindset, doesn't just pick Ohio State because it's his alma mater, and he keeps that in perspective. I want Nick Saban to do the same thing, but I think in today's day and age, it feels like fans don't care about that anymore, and they want you to be as biased as possible towards your team if you work there or went there or whatever. And so I find that dynamic very fascinating because I see it differently. I think it's better for him to be the Kirk Herbstreit and have that objective view. It's part of the reason I love Kirk, because I think Kirk does a tremendous job kind of playing things down the middle, giving great perspective, but you notice he doesn't pick the games he's calling that morning on game day. So I don't know. I like that. I always try to be like that when I'm working in this world, but I understand it, and it just seems like with the shifting landscape of college football, there's also a shift in the way we want our analysts or our commentators to talk about the sport, and we want them to actually be biased. It seems like that's a true thing these days. I don't know. What do you think? Again, let us know on Twitter. You can hit me up at Spencito_. You can comment via the 92 Through the Fan YouTube page. We'll be back Tuesday with another edition of Sons of the Shoe. I'll find out if I'm riding solo or if it's going to be Nick and I back again. But we will do another episode. It will happen, I promise you. And we'll make sure that we cover all things Ohio State and college football when we meet again. I also want to remind you to like, follow, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, 92 Through the Fan website, the Odyssey app, and be sure on the YouTube channel, 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel, that you also comment and engage with us because we do like to engage with you guys. Until next time, we appreciate you tuning in, and as always, go Bucks.